Howdy, gang, and welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff MacLeod, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. Today, I am going to share a Kickstarter preview. And yes, I know I don't share many Kickstarter previews, so when I do, it is normally something that has really caught my eye. So today, we're going to dive on in and take a look at Iceland Settlement to Independence 872 to 1944 from designer Greg Porter. Do want to point out, I have been compensated to share this video with you. Very important. You know that. You know me. I'm very transparent, very upfront. So I thought I'd let you know that ASAP. Now, if you followed the Gaming Gang for quite some time, you know I have covered other game titles from Greg Porter, such as Tango Down and Zombie War. But the game you're probably most familiar with as far as the Gaming Gang goes is the war game Armageddon War, which is set in the not-too-distant future Middle East, which I liked quite a lot. So a lot of people know Greg Porter from his war game designs. He tends to design games of all stripes. And want to point out, Iceland is not a war game. It is not a conflict simulation. It is a Euro game with area control and worker placement. So this is going to be arriving on Kickstarter on July 1st is the slated launch date, and you will be able to reserve a copy for $60. This is supposed to carry a $70 MSRP when it comes out later this year. So as far as I understand, the game plan is to launch on July 1st, and a printer and everything is already lined up. So if this successfully funds, then it'll go to the printer and then be available and be fulfilled at the end of the year or towards the end of the year. So it looks like a pretty quick turnaround is slated for Iceland. Should also mention, I believe there's going to be an early bird special where you'll be able to get this for $45. I'll take a guess, probably first 24 hours or so. Now, keep in mind, this is not the finished product. Now, the game design is complete, but we might see a change in some of these components. I do understand one of the stretch goals is going to be to have a 25% larger game board. So that's something you might want to keep in mind too. Now, of course, Iceland is for 3 to 6 players, ages 12 and up, plays in around 60 to 90 minutes. I have played this with 3 players. I played it with 4 players, but not 5 or 6. But I have to say, from my experience with the game, I don't foresee any issues as far as having 5 or 6 players. I would think that this should scale very, very easily, and that's already part of the design. So let's take a look at the rule book here. It clocks in at 32 pages, which if this was a war game, that'd be a pretty short rule book. And for a Euro game, 32 pages would lead someone to think this is the most complex game ever created as far as a Euro-style game. Don't worry. First 11 pages are the rules. The rest is design notes, historical notes, details about what each of the event cards represents, strategy, as well as a fairly detailed 2-round example of play, which is illustrated also. Nicely laid out. We had absolutely no problems understanding how to play Iceland. So you are looking to settle Iceland, progress, and hopefully get to a point where you have made improvements enough that Iceland will be able to gain its independence at the end of the Second World War. So this game is going to run through 14 rounds, and it is driven by an event deck. So at the beginning of each round, you are going to draw a card. You're going to start with the same card every game. You are going to finish with the same card every game. Now, the dozen cards that make up the rest of this deck are going to vary. So we have 3 eras. We've got Dark Ages, Middle Ages, Industrial Age. Each of those ages have 6 card decks. We're going to randomly select 3 of those cards to make up our deck here. Now, we also have volcano cards. So each era, you are going to have a volcano card that has been randomly shuffled into that deck. So these volcano eruptions are devastating to the country. So out of the 6 cards that make up the volcano deck, there is one which says, well, nothing happens. All the rest have something bad taking place. This is our event deck here. These are some of the extra cards. Here, I'll show you an example of some of the cards here. And it appears that we have some famous Icelandic paintings on these cards. Let me first point out, I know very little history regarding Iceland outside of the negotiations that took place between the U.S. and the Soviet Union way back in the day. That is about it. And my brother has been to Reykjavik a couple of times. But here is an example of one of those volcano eruptions. So this one's actually relatively minor, and it's going to be based on what age, how many improvements have to be destroyed in each region. Pretty wild. That is pretty wild there. Give you an example of some of the other event cards. So this is how we start off each round, is by drawing an event. Now, at the beginning of the game, the oldest player will be named the Lugmathar. I'm sure I mispronounced that. They're essentially the lawgiver, but they are kind of the head honcho, the big cheese, who goes first and actually can make decisions between the other players. Now, you will have an opportunity to elect a new lawgiver every single round, unless the event card says differently. And the player who had been the lawgiver in the previous round cannot be the lawgiver for the new round. So you can elect yourself as the new lawgiver. You can elect somebody else. Whoever has the most votes becomes that round's lawgiver. And there is tons of negotiation going on in Iceland. That is one of the things that really sets this game apart. This is not just simply a worker placement, area control sort of game. It is a game filled with negotiation between the players. And it's important to keep that in mind, because if you play with some hyper competitive players, they might have an issue playing Iceland, because what happens is this is competitive as well as cooperative. So it's competitive because you want to have the most improvement points. You want to have made the biggest difference in the history of this nation. But if Iceland doesn't gain its independence at the end of the game, everybody loses. So it is a balancing act that has to be performed by all the players. You can pick on players a little bit, but if you go overboard, you're going to actually put them in a situation where you will not be able to gain independence at the end of the game. So it's very important to keep that in mind. Now, as far as the board goes, this is Iceland. It's broken up in different regions. It has different improvements here, showing how much gold it's going to cost in order to build that improvement. We also have our improvement point tracker down here, which is going to determine how much income each of the players, or Gothi, receive each round during the income phase. Now, the most income that a player can receive in a round is 13 gold. That is 12 gold from the improvements, and then 1 gold for being the lawgiver. So that's how that works. So we also have culture. The players can purchase culture points. One of the nice things about culture is it goes towards the independence. Now, players don't receive improvement points for purchasing culture, but disasters and volcanic eruptions cannot bring our culture down. As an example, say in a 3-player game, we need 35 points in order to be able to gain Iceland's independence. And those points are the amount of income that each of the players receives. Add that together, as well as the culture. So in a 3-player game, we need 35 points. 4-player game, 45. 5-player, 55. 6-player, 65. So the reality is everybody's got to have an income of around 10 on average, plus at least 5 culture for us to pull this off. And we have 14 rounds. So each player is going to have tokens. We also have gold. And one of the interesting aspects about these tokens is once a token is laid on the board, it stays there. Now, there are a few ways that the token can come off. One is the destruction of an improvement. The other would be if another player takes over an improvement. And last is if the player no longer has any additional tokens, they can take a token from the board to do something else. I've zoomed in so you can get a much better look at the regions here. Each of the regions will have improvements. So these improvements are fishing boats, sheep, cathedrals, fleets, ports, and roads, as well as towns. Now, to form a town, you must have either a fishing boat or sheep. For the other improvements, you must have a town. So there is a bit of a domino effect as far as the loss of towns or the loss of fishing boats or sheep. So it's important to keep that in mind. We also have timber. Now, each of the regions has a little tree marked on it, but depending on the number of players will determine how much timber is available. 1 per player, really. And there's an order that you seed the timber based on the number of players. So what's going to happen each round is you're going to draw an event card. And the game always starts off with the same event, and you always end with the same event. So our first event here is the settlement of Iceland. Each player is going to get their minimum income of 4 gold, and conflicts are not allowed this round. Conflicts are when one player tries to take away an improvement from another player. And as this game progresses, it will happen more often because there are more tokens than spots. So it'll get to the point where you're going to have to take improvements away from other players. Plus, in order to improve your lot in life and win the game, you're going to also have to take things away from other players. So what's going to happen here is the lawgiver player is the first player. Say they're the orange player. They would start off with 1 gold, and then they would get the 4 gold for their income during the income phase. So the bigger gold disc represents the 5. So what the player can do is they can look to purchase an improvement. So in the first round, one of the phases that you have each round is supporting towns. We don't have any town in the first round to start off with, so we don't have to worry about that. So we would actually move right on into our income, which is what we've got right there. Then we go into building improvements. So the player's taking a look around the board, and for convenience sake, because we are focused in on this region, they decide they are going to purchase those fishing boats, which is going to cost them 4 gold, which is going to leave them with 1 gold. Now with timber, whenever a player builds an improvement in a region that still has timber, the player can choose to harvest the timber for 6 gold. Or they can decide to leave the timber there, and every round in the income phase, any region that still has timber is going to provide an extra gold to each of the players who have an improvement in that region. Thing is, everybody has to agree to leave the timber alone. And in this game, you can say you're going to do something. And as long as no gold has changed hands, you have no obligation to do what you said. Talk about that in a little more detail in a few minutes. So let's say this first player, our lawgiver, decides, hey, you know what? I'm going to take that 6 gold. So I'm going to harvest that. Now they got a grand total of 7 gold. And for 6 gold, they can establish this town. So that would cost 6 gold. Now, as far as building improvements and settling towns, you can build 1 improvement per region in your round. You can build 1 of a type in a round. So as an example here, the orange player would not have been able to build another group of fishing boats, and they wouldn't be able to build sheep or anything like that. The only other thing they could do, because it's an exception to the rule, is found the town. So that is what would be going on right there. So the first player would still have 1 gold left. They say, okay, that's it. Then it moves on to, let's say, the green player. Green player would have 2 gold because they were the second player, plus that 4. So they've got 6. And of course, keep in mind, this player now has 2 improvement because they've got the fishing boats and they've got the town. So on that improvement point track, which is right down below this, the orange player would have moved to the 2. That wouldn't have changed their income, but still, you're going to track your improvement, and it can change back and forth throughout a round. It happens all the time, especially later in the game, because there are various improvements that depend on other improvements. So we got the green player. The green player decides they're going to spend 6 gold. So they're going to spend all their gold, and they are going to build the port. Now, the port is worth 1 improvement point per fishing boat. So if these eventually get made, then this would be worth 3, just like the road. The road is worth the number of built sheep in the connected regions. So the road, trade route, connects these 2. This could be worth 4 with these 2 and these 2. Now, if there are no sheep, it has no value. Just like this port, without any fishing boats, it has no value. Now, if for some reason this town were eliminated, that would stay. This would go away because this needs a town. When things happen because of events or volcano eruptions, there is a lot of negotiation that has to take place because on one hand, the players are trying to protect themselves from not losing a lot of their improvements, but also need to remember that you have to earn so many points by the end of the game in order to gain Iceland's freedom. Right. Third player, we'll say, is the red player. So they would actually have started with 3 plus 4 for their income. So giving them a total of 7. Now they could sit here and build one of these improvements here, or they could go to a different region and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to start laying the groundwork for another town. And let's say they're going to do that. Let's say the red player decides they are going to, let's put this down there and make it a little easier for you to see the boats. They're going to go and build these fishing boats, which are going to cost 4. So that means they would still have 3 gold at the end of their round. Last thing that's going to take place after everybody has gone and taken their turn as far as building improvements, and that is going to be to discard gold. So the most gold you can carry over from round to round is 6 gold. So as you gain more and more income, you're going to want to spend that income. Plus, Every improvement you make is going to lead Iceland closer and closer to having those points in order to gain its independence. Remember now, the culture can be purchased, which is over on the other side of the board. It's just a track, and it's 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 9. You can buy culture. Those points do count towards your total at the end of the game. All you got to do is spend the gold that's in the current number that's available. So you go from 2 to 3, 3 to 4, so on. And that can never be lost. So it doesn't get destroyed by volcanoes or events, anything like that. So you always want to bank away some of the culture because you're going to need those points at the end of the game. So let's just see what happens next. Oh, look at this. So we had a volcano card and we lucked out. There are no eruptions. So each of the players would gain an additional gold in this round. Nice. So that would be the event. So each of the players are now going to decide what's going on with the lawgiver. So the lawgiver from the previous turn, as long as an event card doesn't say differently, cannot be the lawgiver for this new round. So what'll happen is the other players can they can nominate themselves, they can nominate other players, and it'll go until the final player would be last round's lawgiver. They have the last vote. So say in a 3-player game, they are the tie-breaking vote. And of course, there can be negotiations with that player. Oh, if you vote for me, I'll give you a gold, or I'll give you 2 gold, or if you vote for me, I promise I'll build fishing boats so that you can build that town up to the north. Now, of course, if gold doesn't change hands, they don't have to do it. Always remember that. And gold can change hands at any point in the game. It's not only during certain phases of the round. It can happen whenever. You can negotiate with other players whenever. So it's important to keep that in mind as well. Just for the heck of it, let's say it turns out the red player becomes the lawgiver. So they had 4 gold because they just got 1 and they had 3. Now they get another 4. So they have 8. And what they might want to do here is they might want to found this town. Now, when you have a town and you also control sheep or fishing boats that supply that town, that's always a good thing because you have control over your own fate. So let's say they did that. That would cost 4. They still have 4 gold. And they could decide to build a fishing fleet. Let's say they decide to do that. They spend their other 4 gold and they build the fishing fleet here. Now they have got 1 improvement point for the fishing boats, 1 for the town, and 2 for the trade fleet or fishing fleet, whatever you want to consider it. So now they will have 4 improvement points where they just had 1 before. Now they've got 4. And then the next player in line, which would have been orange, they had no gold left over. So they have 5 gold and they decide they are going to build this group of fishing boats, which is now going to bump up the green player's port by 1 because they have 2 of the 3 fishing boats built. So that is going to improve them by 1. And of course, this would improve the orange player by 1. And then we would go to the green player, so on and so forth, until we get to the final card, which is World War II. So this is where the game ends. We have until the end of that round to gain the points needed to earn independence. And in a 3-player game, it would be 35 points. And we would take our incomes combine them together, and then also add the culture. And if we had 35 or more with a 3-player game, we would have the independence. Once again, once we gained independence for Iceland, now we can look to see who's the overall winner. So what you're going to do is you're going to look at improvement points, and then we also have these cards here that can be gained during play, which are going to provide bonus victory points. For the sheep, fishing boats, roads, towns, and cathedrals. Now, the cathedrals are also worth 2 improvement points. And these are worth 5 victory points if you own any of these cards at the end of the game. And then, of course, whoever's got the most victory points is the winner. In the case of a tie, whoever's got the most improvement points is the winner. Now, last thing I'm going to mention is the conflict. And this is a game where there is going to be conflict. It's not overwhelming. There are some safeguards built into the design so that players can't just gang up on somebody. Plus, remember, you need to get those points to gain independence. And if you're ganging up on other players to prevent them from advancing, you're never going to earn those points. So there's a little bit of take that to the game, but not a ton. So as an example, we have got conflict. And unless we get an event card that tells us different, so as an example, when we had our first of the rounds, we had no conflict could take place. There's also a time of peace. Same thing, no conflict can take place. But normally, during your improvement phase, you can decide, hey, I want to take something away from somebody else. So as an example, let's say that the green player decides they want to take this town away from the orange player. So we are currently on the 6 circle here. And of course, you can keep spending gold to improve that town. Some have a limit. So as an example here, this is 4. It can never go bigger than that. This essentially means it's far tougher for somebody to take that town away from you when you sink that gold in. But as far as the conflict goes, this is a 6. If the green player wanted to take that away, put that on top, and they would pay double the gold. So they'd have to pay 12 gold in order to take that over. They do. The orange player gets their token back, and that would be it. The orange player can appeal to the lawgiver, asking the lawgiver that they could get half of those funds back. So they could get 3 gold back. Now, the lawgiver can say, yes, you can get half that back. The lawgiver can say, no, you get nothing. That's it. You just lost it. Plain and simple. So once again, a little bit of take that going on, even when somebody takes away one of your improvements. Now, the way to prevent people ganging up on another player is a player can only lose 1 improvement due to conflict per round. So that's a nice safeguard to prevent people from just jumping on in and taking everything away from another player. So all in all, that is how you play Iceland. You're going to go through 14 rounds, building improvements, negotiating with the other players. Hopefully, you are going to earn enough points with your culture and your income in order to be able to earn independence for Iceland. Let's swing on over to the other camera so I can share some final thoughts about Iceland. Now, keep in mind, because this is a Kickstarter preview, I don't provide a review score because this is not the finished product. This is not what a consumer will receive with a successful Kickstarter run, right? There's going to be some changes. I'm not sure exactly what the components will look like at the end of the day. Now, having said that, to my knowledge, the design is done. There are no tweaks or anything like that. Nothing is going to change as far as the gameplay. So I can tell you what I think of playing Iceland with the rest of the gang. Once again, as I mentioned, I played 3 and 4 players. I did not play 5 or 6. But I'll tell you what, we had a blast. We had an awesome time playing Iceland once everybody understood what the premise is, because it is a fine balancing act to play a little bit of screw your neighbor, but then also be looking to cooperate together to make sure at the end of the game you've got enough points. Now, you might think, well, all that negotiation must bring this game to a screeching halt. It doesn't, because you can negotiate at any time, and the negotiations are short and to the point. You're not hemming and hawing and saying, well, let's see. If I trade you this, then no, you're just going to say, hey, you know what? If you do this, I'll do this. Or, I'm thinking of doing this. Would you be interested maybe splitting the cost with me, because then you can build this and that, so on and so forth. Pretty easy. I think where the negotiations do take a little more time is when an event or an eruption takes place and you have to destroy improvements, because players don't want to destroy their own improvements. And those improvements, for the most part, those cards always indicate that it has to be equal between all the players. But if there is leftover destruction that needs to take place, you have to come to an agreement. If you don't come to an agreement, you're going to round up. So there's going to be more destruction for everybody. And that can sometimes take a little bit of time, especially as you're taking a look to see what is the domino effect of, okay, if we lose these fishing boats, that's the only thing that's supporting this town. Nobody's got much gold. They're not going to want to spend gold supporting that town next round, so on and so forth. And then you might have improvements for that town, that if the town disappears, then all those improvements disappear. So that can be a little bit tricky as far as those negotiations. But that's it. At no point in time did we ever go more than 60 minutes with 3 and 4 players. Even the first game we learned how to play. So the game does move relatively quickly, and then it'll really start zipping along once everybody knows how to play. I found this design to be very unique. I love the fact that we get to find out a bit of history about Iceland, especially if you're like me and didn't really know much about it. I thought that was very cool. I also love how we have the details about the history of each of the event cards, which tells us what those represent. We get a bit of discussion about strategy, as well as that extended example of play. Really like this quite a lot. If you enjoy a little bit of Take That in games, you'll certainly enjoy Iceland. If you like historic games, you will like Iceland. If you are a hyper-competitive person who must destroy all who come before you, probably not going to be your game, because you can poke your neighbor only so many times. And if you poke them too much, everybody is going to lose. And there isn't a whole lot of point to play a game for an hour only to wrap up and find out there are no winners. That's never fun. All in all, the gang and I really enjoyed our time playing Iceland. And this is certainly a Kickstarter I recommend you give a very serious look at. All right, that is it for this time out. If you like this video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that bell. It'll not only let you know about other videos that I share, such as this Kickstarter preview, different reviews, different first looks I share, but it'll also let you know when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings right here on YouTube. Of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit gaminggang.com for all the latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more you are not going to find here on YouTube. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Thank you very much for watching. Once again, I'm Jeff MacLeod. And until I see you next time, I certainly hope all of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.